I'm joined now by the Shadow Treasurer Angus Taylor. Angus Taylor, many thanks for your time. Can you just describe to me how the negotiations between yourself and the Treasurer are going right now?
Well, that's a question for the Treasurer, not for me, because the ball is well and truly in his court. We do want to see sensible reforms to strengthen the independence and the capability of the Reserve Bank. But central to that is our view that there shouldn't be a sack and stack strategy for the board. The current Reserve Bank board should transition over, or be given the opportunity to transition over, to the Monetary Policy Board. And that's because we need, at a time like this when inflation is raging, it's been harder to beat than the government anticipated, we need to have stability and continuity in our Reserve Bank board. That's absolutely essential, and that's not something we're prepared to compromise on. So it's up to the Treasurer as to where he wants to go with that.
When did you last have a discussion with the Treasurer about this?
I'm not going to disclose the private discussions I've had with the Treasurer. I think it's important that they be done in confidence. What I would say is we've been very clear about our position, both in public and private, on this critical issue. You know, an independent, strong, capable Reserve Bank is absolutely essential to having a strong, low inflation economy. That's not what we've got at the moment. We need to get inflation back under control, and we're not going to do that by weakening the Reserve Bank. We actually need to strengthen it, not weaken it. And so our concern at a time like this is it's absolutely essential that this transition be done in very carefully to ensure that the bank remains credible and capable at a time when it's been under enormous pressure.
OK, so this week you've seen senior Labor figures, Stephen Conroy, a former minister, also Bill Shorten, a former leader, really having a go at the Reserve Bank, saying any suggestion of rate increases would push Australia's economy into recession, that it would be the Reserve Bank's fault. Is that fair of Labor to be really having a go at the Reserve Bank in this way?
Well, there's a long history of Labor governments and Labor treasurers indeed, you go back to Paul Keating, wanting to tell the Reserve Bank what to do. In fact, Paul Keating used to crow about how he would tell the Reserve Bank what to do, and I don't think that history is lost. I think we still see it. Now, we've learned all around the world since the last big surge of inflation in the 70s and the 80s that if you want to beat inflation and keep it away, position yourself for a strong economy with low inflation, you have to have a strong, capable and independent Reserve Bank. And when the government starts to meddle in that and weaken it, we end up with inflation which is stronger for longer. And that's not what we want. We are seeing inflation right now which is stronger for longer. We've got to beat that. And undermining the credibility and the independence of the Reserve Bank is not the pathway to do that. The pathway from the government's point of view is getting the policy settings right that make it easier for the Reserve Bank to bring down inflation and bring down interest rates. That should be their focus, not jawboning the Reserve Bank.
OK, so jawboning of the Reserve Bank is quite different to what Donald Trump is suggesting in America, where he's suggesting direct intervention, that he would have a say in where interest rates would be in America. Now, he could become the President of the United States very shortly. He says that's his policy. Why would that not then become an influence here in Australia?
Well, it may or may not, but we don't agree with it. We don't think this is the right way forward. We didn't have the level of independence of central banks back in the 70s and 80s that we've had more recently. And the result was we had raging inflation for an extended period of time. And there'll be people watching this program who remember 18% interest rates back in the 80s. I mean, this was diabolical and disastrous for many small businesses and many Australian households. And it would be far worse now than even then to continue to see that stronger for longer high inflation, high interest rates because of the amount of debt we have now. So we don't think this is that's the right pathway forward. We've seen the history. It's very, very clear. Keeping a strong, independent Reserve Bank's important, but where we're going wrong right now is not undermining, we shouldn't be undermining the Reserve Bank, it's that the government hasn't got its settings right. So it's got the foot on the accelerator at exactly the time that the Reserve Bank has got the foot on the brake, and that's how you brake the engine, and we're seeing that with our economy right now.
OK, I want to go to the Reserve Bank and its own structure, because that's where clearly there is ongoing negotiation potentially, but potentially disagreement between you and the government. So on Friday, this is what the Governor, Michelle Bullock, said when she was asked in the parliamentary hearing about how she would prefer the board in the future to be composed. Have a listen.
I personally, and I think I've said this before publicly, I would like continuity on both boards, the Monetary Policy Board and the Governance Board. Why do I say that? I think it would be really helpful for me if there was at least one or two of the current board members who are familiar with the bank, who know a bit about how the bank runs, to move across to the Governance Board rather than having a whole new Governance Board that hasn't had any contact with the bank before. So, personally, I think if we can achieve continuity by some people going into the Monetary Policy Board and one or two going across to the Governance Board, that would be my best case scenario.
And does that sound reasonable to you, Angus Taylor?
Well, there's nothing stopping members of the current Reserve Bank board being on both boards. This is the point. What we want to see more than anything is continuity on the Monetary Policy Board, and the reason for that is that that's the board that has to beat inflation and get interest rates back to more sustainable levels over time. So it's absolutely crucial for every single Australian. So that continuity for us is the absolute top priority, but there's nothing stopping those current Reserve Bank board meeting members being on both boards.
Okay,
we think that's completely feasible and reasonable.
Okay, so let me jump in, because one issue is about now the dual mandate of the Reserve Bank, and that is not just to fight inflation, but also to try and maintain full employment as well. Now, already, the Treasurer has appointed Alana Rubin and Ian Ross, former union officials, but also acknowledged Labor experts, onto the Reserve Bank board. My question to you is whether you're fearful here the government is seeking influence over the Reserve Bank board and interest rate decisions by appointing more of these types of officials onto that Monetary Policy Board.
Yeah, we are concerned about the way the government has made appointments. Absolutely, Ross. And I made that point at the time that the recommendations of the review to the Reserve Bank laid out a very clear process for how the appointments should be made. And the day the Treasurer adopted those recommendations, he then ignored them when he made his first two appointments. I mean, talk about hypocrisy. So we are concerned about that. And this, again, I think there's a lack of respect we've seen on the Labor side of politics for the effectiveness of an independent, capable Reserve Bank and the challenge you create if the government wants to get involved. Now, the government should focus on its job. It's got a clear lane here. And that lane is about making it easier for the Reserve Bank to bring down inflation and interest rates. That's what it should focus on. The trouble is that's not going well for the government. No shortage of economists saying they're getting their settings wrong, and they have got the settings wrong in the last budget. And so now they're trying to do the Reserve Bank's job instead. That's not the right answer. It will not end well. It might be a good political strategy for Labor, but it will lead to bad outcomes for Australian households and businesses.
And should there be recrimination if the Reserve Bank did raise interest rates one or two more times because of inflation?
Well, the Reserve Bank should do what is necessary to beat inflation and to meet its objectives. That's its job. Now, it has to do that within the constraint of what the government's policies are. And as I say, at the last budget, we saw 16% growth in spending in the next 2 years. We're seeing industrial relations policies that are reducing flexibility in our workplaces. We're seeing immigration policies where we've had population in this country grow by over 1.2 million in 2 years. I mean, all of these things have big inflationary impacts, and it's time for the government to focus on what it can do to make it easier for the Reserve Bank to beat inflation and get back to that low inflation, strong growth economy.
Treasurer Angus Taylor, always good to chat to you, and many thanks for your time today.
Thanks, Ross.